For years, Zoë Kravitz wore her silence like armor. The world saw the polished version of her, edgy, elegant, and always effortlessly cool. But behind the camera-ready smile lived a girl who had been quietly carrying a weight she never asked for. The weight of a broken home, the scars of fame at birth, and a love story between two people who once created magic but couldn't hold on to it. She was born into a dream but raised in the aftermath of a fairy tale that faded too soon. Now, years later, with emotions bubbling just beneath the surface, Zoë does the unthinkable. She speaks. What started as a calm, reflective conversation turned into an unfiltered outpouring of emotions, and the name that spilled from her lips silenced the room. Lisa Bonet. The bond between Zoë and her mother was always seen as spiritual, even unbreakable. But the truth? It was much more complex. Lisa Bonet and Lenny Kravitz were a cosmic collision, two wild hearts who lived and loved by their own rules. From the start, their chemistry was otherworldly. Lisa, already a household name with an ethereal edge, met Lenny, a soulful firebrand just beginning his ascent. They married young, full of passion and poetry, and welcomed Zoë in 1988. On the surface, they looked like a bohemian dream come true. Art, music, rebellion, and love, all wrapped up in two impossibly cool people. But behind the aura of perfect imperfection, reality was beginning to pull them apart. Lenny, whose star was rising fast, began slipping away into the whirlwind of tours and recording sessions. The further his fame took him, the harder it became for him to stay grounded. Lisa, deeply spiritual and longing for stillness, found herself raising their daughter in a home that no longer felt shared. They were both young, still searching for who they were. And they were growing in opposite directions. Love, even the kind that sparks like lightning, couldn't glue together lives that were slowly drifting apart. In time, the silence between them became louder than words. And when Lenny eventually admitted he had broken the trust that held their bond together, the illusion shattered. By 1991, their paths diverged. The divorce was quiet, dignified, free of scandal. But its impact was seismic for their daughter. For Zoë, it meant splitting her soul in two. Her childhood became a tug-of-war between two worlds, her mother's serene retreat and her father's glamorous, ever-changing lifestyle. She felt torn between presence and absence, structure and freedom. Lisa tried to protect her from the madness of celebrity, while Lenny was the embodiment of it. She adored them both. But she couldn't help but feel the invisible cost of their choices. Zoë was still just a child, yet old enough to feel the betrayal between her parents. She instinctively stood by her mother's side, especially when co-parenting tension bubbled. But deep inside, she wondered if her father had felt trapped too, and whether she had truly understood either of them. That quiet wondering stayed with her for years. It would become the heart of the emotional reckoning she would later share with the world. Because when Zoë finally spoke, she didn't just reflect. She revisited the deepest corners of her childhood and exposed truths that had long remained unspoken. After the split, Zoë lived with Lisa in the tucked-away hills of Topanga Canyon. It was a home built on incense, meditation, and creative expression, a world far from red carpets and paparazzi, where Lisa nurtured Zoë with gentle rituals and fierce boundaries. Homeschooling, music, poetry, energy cleanses. Everything was intentional, even sacred. But for a growing girl curious about the world, the walls Lisa built for protection sometimes felt more like confinement. There were no sleepovers when Lenny visited, no late-night hangouts, no camera flashes unless absolutely necessary. Zoë was being raised in a sanctuary, but it felt more like a bubble she couldn't burst. She longed for the things other kids had: school dances, spontaneous adventures, a life unfiltered by her mother's rules. And every time she saw her dad walking red carpets or performing in glittering cities, The ache for freedom grew stronger. A question began to form in her mind. Had she chosen the wrong side? Had she misunderstood what her father needed and what her mother feared? Their relationship, once sacred and tight, began to stretch and strain. Lisa's love was fierce, but Zoë craved space to breathe. Their arguments grew louder, more emotional. One night, it all came to a head. In the middle of a heated fight, Zoë, angry and exhausted, threw out a sentence that would echo through their lives. "I want to live with Dad." At just 11 years old, she made a decision that would change everything. She packed her things and left. Lisa, heartbroken but composed, watched her daughter walk away. She smiled through tears, the kind of smile that tries to hide a soul cracking in two. Zoë wouldn't understand that look. Not then. Not until much later, when life brought her back to those moments. Back to the boundaries that once felt like burdens. Back to the mother who loved so deeply that she built walls instead of bridges. It would take years, but eventually, Zoë saw it all with new eyes. The discipline, the incense, the quiet lessons wrapped in whispered affirmations. They weren't cages. They were love in its purest, most protective form. But at the time, all Zoë wanted was out. And when she moved in with Lenny, it felt like stepping into a fantasy. He welcomed her with open arms, ready to give her the freedom she craved. Miami, then New York. The world at her fingertips. No boundaries, no rules. For the first time, Zoë felt like she could breathe. Like she could finally be the version of herself she dreamed of. But as the glitter of her new life began to settle, she started to feel something she hadn't expected. A quiet, growing emptiness. The moment Zoë thought she'd finally found a rhythm with her father, it felt like a new beginning. There was excitement in being closer to Lenny, this larger-than-life figure she had once only known in fragments. The same man whose voice echoed through speakers around the world now called her his little girl. But that closeness came at a price. Because when you love someone constantly on the move, the silence between the moments becomes deafening. Lenny was electrifying on stage, hypnotic in interviews, but behind the curtain he was a man swallowed by his schedule. Zoë joined him city after city, New York, Paris, Tokyo. She witnessed the glamour, the chaos, the exhaustion. Yet for all the lights and applause, there were countless nights when she sat alone in hotel rooms, hearing only the hum of distant traffic. At first, she relished the freedom. She dyed her hair without asking, wore what she wanted, and stayed out late with no curfews. There was no scent of sage wafting from her mom's meditation room. No more gentle reminders to reflect or journal. It was the kind of teenage liberation so many crave, and yet, it didn't feel like victory. Something started to gnaw at her. A quiet yearning for structure, for someone to check the time and ask if she'd eaten, if she was okay. She had autonomy, but what she lacked was anchoring. That freedom eventually began to weigh on her like chains made of gold, shiny but heavy, beautiful but cold. She found herself drifting, her identity unraveled and reassembled in bits. One week, she was vintage glam. The next, she was barefoot at underground art shows. The world applauded her originality, but beneath that fearless style was a girl still searching for solid ground. Zoë would later confess she had to learn early on how to be her own protector because no one else was fully there to do it. She had become wise beyond her years, but it was wisdom earned through ache, not guidance. The price of self-reliance was steep, and she paid for it quietly. As she got older, the memories of her mother's home, the softness, the stillness, no longer seemed suffocating. Instead, they became sacred. Those small rituals, the murmured prayers, the aroma of eucalyptus in the hallway, she missed them. But she didn't speak it aloud. Not to her father. Not even to her mother. Not even to herself. She carried that longing like a hidden scar, until it all came to a head years later, when everything she had buried finally surfaced, with a quiet force no one saw coming. And that storm began to stir just as someone new entered her mother's world. Lisa had spent years quietly healing, far from paparazzi lenses and red carpets. Then, in 2005, a chance meeting at a jazz club changed everything. A man with wild hair, a kind smile, and a heart as big as his dreams, Jason Momoa. What felt like fate was, in Jason's words, a childhood vow fulfilled. He had seen Lisa on television at just 8 years old and told his mom, "That's the woman I'm going to marry." Somehow the stars aligned. Their bond was magnetic. They spoke in the language of artists, fluid, raw, sacred. Jason brought a different kind of love. It wasn't flashy. It was earthbound. Lisa found in him someone who didn't just admire her, but cherished her solitude, her rituals, her need for depth. And what sealed their connection? He embraced Zoë. Not with force, but with patience. When Lisa introduced him to her then teenage daughter, there was no awkward stepfather act. He showed up quietly, steadily, supporting Zoe's early career, celebrating her modeling contracts, sitting front row at her indie film premieres. He gave her space, but always stood nearby. She affectionately called him her Papa Bear. He called her Mizo. They surfed in Hawaii, cooked barefoot in the kitchen, took goofy selfies backstage. For the first time in years, Zoë watched her mother glow. The kind of glow that made even strangers believe in love again. When Jason and Lisa had 2 more children, Zoë slipped effortlessly into the role of big sister. She loved them openly, shared family photos like treasures. For once, it felt like all the broken pieces had formed something whole. Then, in 2017, a quiet wedding sealed their bond. No media circus, just vows, whispered promises, and close friends under a moonlit sky. It felt like forever. But just as quickly as the peace had arrived, subtle tremors began to shake the foundation. The very qualities that once drew them together, Lisa's sacred silence, Jason's untamed energy, started to tug them apart. The shifts were slow, almost invisible. But the cracks widened quietly, like pages in a book no one wanted to finish reading. To the world, they remained Hollywood's golden pair, soulful, grounded, electric. But in January 2022, the illusion shattered. Their poetic announcement of separation left fans stunned. The language was gentle, the message respectful, but the impact? Earth-shaking. Because it wasn't just a divorce, it was the undoing of something rare, something people had believed in. And for Zoë, it wasn't just public news. It was a wound reopened. She had watched her mother rebuild, rise from heartbreak, trust again. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not again. The truth behind their split stayed mostly veiled. But whispers spoke of diverging paths. Jason's career had exploded post-Aquaman, dragging him into a whirlwind of filming, travel, and fame. Lisa, who had long stepped away from the spotlight, wanted peace, stillness, roots. They hadn't failed each other. They had simply grown apart. The pace of their souls no longer matched. For Zoë, it brought a déjà vu she hadn't wanted. She noticed it first in her mother's voice, soft, cracking, uncertain. "She just sounded so tired," Zoë would say. "It was like hearing an old song I'd hoped never to replay." The sadness was quiet but unmistakable. And once again, Zoë found herself in the middle of 2 worlds, trying to hold together the people she loved most, even as their paths diverged. She had always seemed untouchable. Zoë Kravitz, cool, composed, with that effortless grace that made people believe she had everything figured out. But behind that poise was a storm no one saw coming. The fallout from her parents' separation wasn't just about Lisa Bonet and Jason Momoa. It hit Zoë like a mirror shattering. For months she avoided the spotlight, skipping red carpets, dodging interviews, and guarding her mother from the harsh glare of media speculation. But silence doesn't erase pain, and for Zoë, the silence grew heavier each day. It wasn't just a breakup. It was the haunting echo of a family cycle repeating, and she could feel the weight of every whisper that suggested she was doomed to walk the same path. The online world didn't wait. Judgment came fast and cruel. Anonymous comments turned her social pages into battlegrounds. Like mother, like daughter. Another failed love. The toxicity pierced deep, turning heartbreak into public spectacle. While Lisa and Jason's marriage quietly unraveled behind closed doors, Zoe's own love story with actor Karl Glusman had already come undone. Their 2019 Paris wedding felt like something out of a dream, set at Lenny Kravitz's breathtaking 18th-century estate. Stars, beauty, elegance. But dreams can dissolve fast. By December 2020, she filed for divorce. Whispers of unmet emotional needs and creative differences surfaced, though neither Zoë nor Karl ever publicly laid blame. And as Lisa's separation went public in early 2022, the comparisons exploded. People didn't just blame Zoë for her divorce, they blamed her for Lisa's too. There were cruel insinuations that her upbringing made her incapable of love, that her mother's free-spirited parenting had led her astray. Zoë, once the poster child of confidence, was now caught in a cruel narrative she never asked for. Her heartbreak became public property, and her silence was mistaken for indifference. But what no one realized was that beneath the surface, she was drowning in guilt, not just over a failed marriage, but over wounds buried since childhood. There was one choice she had made long ago that she never stopped regretting, and it was time she finally said it out loud. During a quiet 2025 interview, the cameras weren't even meant to capture what came next. There was no script, no intention to bare her soul. But when the topic of Lisa came up, something broke inside Zoë. Her voice cracked, her eyes filled. And then she cried. Not as an actress, not as a public figure, but as a daughter who had carried too much for far too long. She confessed that leaving her mother at age 11 to live with her father had haunted her. At the time, it felt like a path to freedom. The allure of glamour and independence had drawn her in. But as years passed and her own relationships began to fracture, she began to see the truth. Her mother hadn't been trying to control her. She had been trying to protect her from a world that consumes young women before they can even define themselves. It was a revelation that struck hard. Over the years, Zoë has owned sleek European rides like a matte black Porsche 911 and a rare vintage Jaguar E-Type. Her timepieces include a Cartier Panthère and a limited edition Rolex Cosmograph Daytona. She's also invested in modernist Los Angeles real estate, including a serene Laurel Canyon home with eco-conscious architecture. Though she doesn't flaunt it, she co-owns a luxury skincare line and has equity in a boutique fashion house. Industry insiders whisper about her role as a silent investor in a sustainable film production startup. Her private insurance portfolio is believed to include high-tier asset protection, health coverage for independent contractors, and a rare legacy policy linked to her family estate. Zoë's financial strategy mirrors her artistic one. Diversified, low-key, quietly powerful. Her journey reveals a critical lesson. Emotional freedom and financial wisdom go hand in hand when you live on your own terms, not the world's. Zoë Kravitz's breakdown wasn't a weakness, it was a turning point. And in that moment of emotional honesty, she didn't just reclaim her story. She rewrote the narrative for every woman judged by the end of a relationship instead of the strength it takes to walk away. The world finally saw her, not just as a celebrity, but as a daughter, a woman, and someone brave enough to embrace both love and loss with her whole heart. And that's a wrap on Zoë Kravitz's emotional journey. From public heartbreak to personal healing. If this story moved you or made you see her in a new light, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most untold stories. We've got some jaw-dropping celebrity revelations coming your way soon. Until then, remember, strength isn't about never breaking. It's about finding beauty in the cracks, just like Zoe did. See you in the next one.